Good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for coming. Thank you, Tim. One of the privileges of being the chair of the Ad Association is getting the industry together behind these big issues and doing something about it together. And that's why we call it a summit, not a conference, because at a summit, all the leaders can gather together around the mandate for change. So it's brilliant that you've all come. And I think we've concluded so far this morning that it really is time for change. And it's in our gift as the leaders of the industry to push through that change. So it's an exciting moment. This is my fourth lead. And in the last two, we've started to lay out the business case for advertising. 2 years ago in AdPays 1, we talked about the economic value of advertising. For every pound spent, £6 return to GDP, 100 billion contribution to the economy, 500,000 jobs. Last year, we launched AdPays 2, which had a focus on the SME sector. 90% of businesses are SMEs. 8 out of 10 of them believe in advertising, but only half of them are advertising, and there's huge potential for economic growth in that sector. And in your packs to take away today, you'll see AdPays 3. And AdPays 3 looks at the contribution that advertising makes to culture, media, and sport. And what it concludes, and again, thank you to Deloitte who've helped us with this project, what it concludes is that advertising is making a huge contribution, paying for a vast contribution in the things that we love to do in culture, media, and sport. And if that contribution, which runs to billions, was taken away, then the things we take for granted, like regional press, free access to search, radio, Broadchurch, would be severely impacted by lack of funds. So I think those 3 papers are starting to make the business case for advertising. And obviously, that's a brilliant place to start for us in terms of proving our economic value. But ultimately, this conference, this summit, is about whether there's time for change and how we have to look at a broader perspective. And so we wanted to look outside our business and get some perspectives from academia, from the consumer, from the world of arts, and from the world of politics to really say, how do they see us? And do they think we need to change? And if so, what would their challenges be for us today? So I'm delighted to introduce Professor Paddy Barwise, much loved of the AA. And he's a kind of buy one, get one free panelist because he's both an academic at the London Business School, but also he's the chairman of Which. So he's got a really good perspective on what consumers want in the New Deal. So welcome, Paddy. So Peter Bazalgette needs no introduction, but he is the chair of Arts Council England. And our third panellist, who will join me on the sofa when she arrives, is Stella Creasy, who is the Shadow Minister for Competition and Consumers. And she's the MP for Walthamstow and is giving a speech in Walthamstow. So I'm not going to introduce her when she comes. She can just say her bit, and we'll then get into questions. So the way we're going to run the format is to ask each speaker to just talk for 4 or 5 minutes on their perspective on us and the New Deal. Throw out some challenges. You can start feeding in your questions as soon as they start speaking, either on the iPads or by raising your hands at the end. So welcome, Paddy and Peter. And Paddy, would you like to start?
Well, Which and I very much welcome this debate. The issues are bubbling up, and it's good that the AA is tackling them before they really explode. For those that don't know, Which is a charity that aims to help and empower UK consumers. We're 100% funded by our commercial businesses, mainly our very successful print and online publishing business. We like competitive markets. Most of our policy work is on big markets where competition isn't working well. We see well-regulated advertising as an intrinsic part of successful competitive markets. We ourselves don't take advertising, so we can reasonably claim to take an independent consumer-centric view of its regulation, although we do have a vested interest as our own advertising is regulated by the ASA. One of today's issues is self-regulation. We're in favour in principle, although it's very hard to make it work in practice. And in fact, we see the ASA as a rare successful example. Our main concern is to ensure that it keeps up with the accelerating pace of change. For instance, as has already been said, are its criteria, legal, decent, honest, and truthful, still sufficient? They're necessary, but are they sufficient? Only the last two, honest and truthful, are relevant to which? We see decency as a citizenship issue, not a consumer issue, and we mostly deal with cases where the business is operating legally, but the advertising, in our view, isn't honest and truthful. Examples include actual versus advertised broadband speeds, greenwash, and misleading health claims. These are intellectually pretty straightforward, being mainly about the factual accuracy of product and price claims. But what about the other four issues on today's agenda, in addition to self-regulation? First, advertising aims to influence what people think, feel, and do about the advertised brands. That includes brands that can have significant bad effects for those who consume them. Traditionally, fags, booze, and fattening foods, but now also things like online gambling and payday loans. And there are particular concerns about children and other vulnerable consumers. Secondly, advertising may also influence what people think, feel, and do about things other than the advertised brands. Perennial issues such as gender roles, materialism, self-esteem, body image. Thirdly, advertising is a conspicuous aspect of capitalism, and capitalism is coming under criticism because of growing income and wealth inequality. Business leaders are increasingly seen as fat cats out for themselves who neither understand nor care about the lives of ordinary people. Much of this criticism may be unfair and ill-informed, but we still need to deal with it. And advertisers undeniably see some people as more valuable than others. Finally, we have the new difficult challenges of data transparency and fairness. Much of all this is outside which is consumer remit, except at the margin. For the data one, we also have a vested interest because we use digital marketing and we hold subscriber data. For all four issues, we want proportionate and evidence-based policies. Both of these are hard to achieve. It's hard to agree proportionate policies when both the critics and the defenders of advertising adopt extreme positions. And it's hard to be evidence-based when the evidence on the big issues is genuinely hard to establish. But I think we can do a lot better than we've done to date. For instance, and I'm speaking here for myself, not which, a key driver of long-term obesity is the way small children develop preferences for healthy or unhealthy foods. Mexican babies don't like chili con carne. Mexican 10-year-olds can't live without it. The evidence is that advertising has very little influence on this development process, but the medical establishment has focused far more on advertising restrictions than on understanding the early development of food preferences. And in response, the industry has naturally opposed the restrictions, but also completely failed to explore the bigger issue. None of this is easy. Legal, decent, honest, and truthful assumes the classic economist's view of the rational consumer. We all know that real consumers aren't like that, although the extent to which we, are irrational depends on your view of rationality. For instance, the terms and conditions of PayPal are longer than Macbeth. It's not irrational to anyone other than economists to click the button saying you've read and understood the T&Cs without having done so. That's why Which launched its Real Consumers program a couple of years ago to help ground consumer policy in actual consumer behavior rather than relying on the classic rational economic model tempered by experience and common sense. We're collaborating with some leading academics and policymakers, and we're starting to collaborate with some businesses to make this happen. All this suggests to me two questions for you, the lead delegates. First, what are you doing to support the development of proportionate evidence-based solutions grounded in real consumer behavior? Secondly, do we need a fifth criterion for the ASA? And if so, how should it be worded? Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Paddy. Oh, brilliant, Stella. Just in time. Can you sit down?
Good timing.
How are you? Okay. Peter, your turn.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome, Stowe.
Hi.
Fresh from Walthamstow.
Definitely.
Do you want a glass?
Thanks very much. So we're allowed 3 or 4 minutes, and we were told very strictly we were only allowed to ask one question. And I noticed Paddy asked 2.
I know.
I've got 2 hats.
I've
been introduced.
I may retaliate and ask 3 questions if I feel like it.
I knew
What
this
I want
panel
to
would
do
be
this
trouble.
morning is just build on what Cilla said at the start. This document, The Value of Advertising for the UK's Culture, Media and Sport, is evidence of the desire of this industry to look outwards and say, what is it doing for the whole country and what is it doing for society? So what I wanted to do this morning was just say a word or two about the creative industries and about whether advertising and marketing is part of the creative industries. Yes is the answer to that, and if so, what does that mean? So the creative industries was a conceit, a construct that we sort of invented in the late 90s, and we were the first country in the world to do it. And we have people like Chris Smith and David Putnam to thank for that. When the Labour government came in the late 90s, they did some new thinking on it, and they gathered together the different industries that now make up the official definition of the creative industries: advertising and marketing, television, film, computer games, IT, radio, and so on and so forth, design, architecture, all the bits that are now part of that. Arts and culture, of course, I would mention that, would I not, being from the Arts Council. So all of those things were gathered together, and that was sort of useful, but we didn't really take it much further. Now, recently, in fact, just about a week ago, we had some new numbers on what the value of the creative industries are to the British economy. If you were being absolutely honest, how many of you would put your hands up and say you know what those numbers are? How many of you? Okay, nobody. Right, that's quite interesting, because that's telling me you're not identifying with the creative industries and you're not following their progress generally. So my challenge to you is you should be doing that, okay? Well, the numbers were as follows. For the second year running, the creative industries grew at 10% year on year, okay? And they're growing at 3 times the rate of the economy, and the economy itself, as we know, is growing about 2.5, 2.6. And since 2010, they've created employment at 6 times the rate of the economy, okay? That's fantastic, incredibly important to the future of this country and its economy. But do you know what the best news is? It's got nothing to do with economics. The best news is that the creative industries have a significance way beyond economic value, because they define our culture. They define our national conversation. They define our identity. They define our brand abroad. So they are incredibly important to the future of this country. Now, as we move forward, we should have proper industrial strategies for the creative industries, because they're now, as defined, represent 5% of our economy. So they're incredibly important. And if they can deliver that sort of growth in an era when we need growth desperately, then we need a really good industrial policy for the creative industries, and we need advertising and marketing to feed into that. As well as that, we need the creative industries, as that policy is developed, that strategy is developed, to give, if you like, a unified voice to government, to help government develop that policy. And I don't think we've had that unified policy up to now. I'll give you a couple of examples. Education. There's a really important issue for the creative industries at the moment, and it is that visual arts and creative and performing arts, what you might call the creative arts, have taken a back seat in our state schools. As our state schools have become more and more instrumental, dominated by the STEM agenda, which is perfectly valid in its own right, and headmasters and headmistresses have been made to tick boxes. These other things that they are not being judged on properly by Ofsted have been put to one side. But the creative education our children get not only is part of their right to have every child as it were, realise their own creative potential. But the best that come through are critical to the advertising and marketing industry and critical creative industries. That's an issue for the whole creative industries. How are we going to join together to push that? Let me mention another issue that's really important to us all, and we all know this: diversity. We're absolutely clear that in the creative industries, we do not represent the whole country. The statistics on our employment is that we don't bring people in from every section of the community. Now, on a fairness basis, that has to be tackled anyway. But of course, we know to get the best ideas from every section of the country makes commercial sense too. And everybody, arts and culture, television and film, everybody's trying to tackle this, and I know advertising is too. But we're not really working together. We're not sharing best practice and sharing the best ideas. So there are two ideas where we should really be identifying on what we're doing. So I see behind me, what do I see? Some slogans: valued, economy, society, responsible people, responsible people, responsible people, 3 times. Well, let's be responsible people then. And let's think about the creative industries as a whole. And let's talk about how advertising and marketing fits into that. And next time I come to speak to you, which the way I've been carrying on now will probably be in about a decade, but nevertheless, the next time I come to speak to you, let's see more hands up, knowing about the creative industries in general, rather than just your own sector.
Thank you, Peter. So, Stella, can we ask you how you see the advertising industry and whether you think it's time for us to investigate a new deal and a new way of looking at ourselves, the creative industries and consumers?
Thank you, Cilla. And it's obviously hard to follow Peter. Let me try by starting to talk about Star Wars. Which I hope, looking out at this audience, I think you'll probably all get that cultural reference in a good way. There is a big challenge facing our whole society, which I saw through Star Wars at Christmas, because I spent my Christmas building a Lego Death Star. My brother had bought this because we thought that my niece and nephew would enjoy playing with us, or at least watching us making the Lego Death Star with their supervision. They weren't interested. And I had a really interesting moment where I realised that for them, a toy which involved following instructions just didn't cut it anymore. How did I win the Best Aunt at Christmas award? Because I bought my nephew a watch which was interactive, and he could go and take pictures of his toys and make videos and upload them. And he put the watch on straight away, ran off, straight away was able to use it. That isn't about the technology. That is about a generation that we now have in this country for whom there is a presumption of interactivity and information out there at the heart of it. That my niece and nephew, they touch everything, thinking that it will move around them, that it will shape around them. Now, if you think about the last 2 years alone, we've now got 1,200 exabytes of data being produced in this world, of which 90% was created in the last 2 years alone. This is a generation that's going to grow up with more information, more interactivity than we could even begin to imagine. That changes the challenge for all of us, whether in politics, whether in advertising, whether in business, about how we respond and engage with a society that is demanding interactivity, that is demanding the opportunity to shape the world around them. It also raises the bar about the importance of the kind of information and the kind of interactivity that they get. Let me give you 2 more examples of why that matters. As an MP, I go and I visit all sorts of groups in my community. First and foremost, I was at a pensioners group, and they gave me a great big long list of complaints about the council, as they do. I said, well, why don't you ring the council? These are things about bin collections, or things about fly tipping. They said, oh, no, couldn't possibly ring the council because I can't afford to wait on the phone line. I said, well, what are you talking about? It's just it's a local rate call. They were still paying for local rate calls. Now, who here gets free local rate calls as part of their broadband deal, as part of their phone bill, as a matter of course? Yes. It's estimated that it's £19 a week that it's costing some of the most vulnerable people in our community to pay what we call the poverty premium. That basically, because they can't get better deals for their services, whether it's their phones, whether it's their energy, whether it's their insurance, they are cross-subsidising people like myself who can organise a deal. How we get information to people to be able to help them be sharper consumers is absolutely at the heart of what you are doing, and absolutely at the heart of what we in government need to make sure works for people. We need to make sure it's a fair fight, that the information out there is not just trusted, but also useful and accessible, so that the pensioners in my community stop hassling me about their bins and can actually get on and for themselves make those choices. Second point I want to make is that I was also this week, I had a surgery talking to a young man who was telling me about radicalisation in my local sixth form college. It's a very, very real issue for me in my part of town. I don't want you to think that about Walthamstow and its only challenge. Walthamstow is God's own country if we were to design a logo for it. But we have a challenge in our local community. And actually, it's not just about radicalisation. An awful lot of young people I talk to in Walthamstow think that the Illuminati is real. 100 million hours of YouTube video is created every single day in this world. People are sharing all sorts of new forms of information online through social media that isn't being questioned. So the call for trusted source of information, for trusted intermediaries who can help people make sense of that information becomes stronger in a society when information has the potential to empower people and change some of those dynamics around poverty, around interactivity. If I can teach my niece and nephew to code, I'm pretty sure my family could retire much earlier than they would do otherwise. There is huge potential in all of this. But in order to unlock that, all of us have to play our role. So that's why I certainly see that the way in which we present information in our society, the way in which we interact with our society, there are huge opportunities in it, but also there are huge responsibilities for all of us as a result. Because if we get this wrong, it's not just that our children believe that there is merit in Dan Brown's books, it's that actually we will miss out on all those opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Stella. Great point. So I think that's a really interesting overview of perspectives from politics, the arts, the consumer perspective, the academic perspective. I mean, if I can summarise, I think, what the common threads are from each, I think what all our speakers are asking for is something beyond legal, decent, honest and truthful. Is it the fairness that Stella talked about? Is it the trust? Is it the recognition that we're drowning in data and we need to use that data, as Andrew was saying, to better serve consumers and understand the consumer better? Peter's saying that we're a little bit isolated in our world of advertising and we need to think bigger. We need to think creative industries, not just advertising. I hope if you ask questions about the advertising business, Peter, a lot of hands would go up, and we do know our numbers, but I think a relevant challenge to think of ourselves as part of a wider creative industry perspective. And then Paddy's final question to us is, what are we individually doing to develop the proportionate evidence-based solutions? So thank you all for those brilliant provocations. We're going to take questions. We'll take a few from the floor and then the ones that you've been giving us on iPads. So the mics are ready. Any questions from the floor?
You want to know where you get a Lego Death Star, by the way? It's the Lego store. It's brilliant.
From your niece and nephew, yeah. I think. Any questions from the floor? Gosh, everyone's dying for coffee. All right, let's see if there are any that you're prepared to ask on the iPad. Paddy, for you, are you disagreeing with what Richard Eyre said earlier? Were you here for that bit?
No.
Okay.
Yes, I was, sorry. Yes, I was here for that bit. No, I don't disagree with I think anything that Richard said.
You agree with everything Richard said?
Yes.
Well,
yes,
that's
a
good.
very wise...
That's not good. I wasn't here and I do disagree with him.
Yes,
Go on then, Peter.
No, that's another principle.
I mean, I think the question, it was from Adam Kinsley, the question was more about, is it the view of the panel that if it's legal it can be advertised, or do you think that ethics should trump legality?
Well, I think legal, decent, honest and truthful is necessary but not sufficient.
Yeah.
And that's why real consumers come in. Okay, so it is true that we've always argued that a lot of the anti-advertising people genuinely don't realise that advertising is about brands within categories. It's not about category consumption. Yeah. But that is not the whole truth. When we talk about vulnerable consumers, that is not a black and white issue. Okay, now, I won't work for tobacco companies. Okay, you have to make judgments about where to draw certain lines. Every product and service has negative as well as positive effects. Yeah. Every product and service. In some cases, it's more so. You have to take a view on that. In the case of HFSS food, then there's a compromise to do with not advertising unhealthy foods on kids' programs. Some people, including the Labour Party now, thinks that's insufficient, and you should limit it, you have to recognise that's a trade-off, okay? Because the one undeniable economic impact of advertising is it does pay for culture, media and sport, and that's a trade-off you may choose to make. Right now, we are almost entirely dependent on the BBC, which is not advertising funded, for original UK kids programmes. So the detail really matters, and focusing on the big issues rather than focusing on the issues which are populist matters.
Yeah.
So I think we can collectively do a much better job than we have been doing, and I don't think anything I've just said is at all inconsistent with what Richard said.
No, I think that there's a lot of consistency this morning, and legal, decent, honest and truthful is servicing us as well. The ASA do a brilliant job. I think what we're hearing this morning is fairness, trust, clarity, simplicity, access, connection, making it easier.
But it also has to be evidence-based, okay? So that if insofar as, communications have mixed effects, how significant are those?
Yeah.
And, I think in some ways, not as an advertising industry, but as marketers, actually in a policy context, we should be more assertive.
Yeah.
Right now, we have a Cabinet Office Minister. Apparently, you mustn't use the word marketing to him because that's sort of not acceptable. So if you're dealing with the issue that Stella raised, which is, poor people pay more for products than people in this room pay. Now, one of the things I've been arguing for 3 years is that we have our resource allocation wrong between putting public money through the BBC licence fee into superfast broadband versus getting people online. It's hundreds of millions going into driving superfast broadband, and it's sort of order 10 million a year into getting people online. Slowly that argument is being won, but obviously the people who are not online, all of the vulnerable criteria apply to them.
Absolutely.
We know how to do it. Okay, so because we as marketers haven't been sufficiently assertive to say, to make better policies, we need to understand behaviour change. Simply, DrinkAware, okay, very close to this industry. DrinkAware was set up, and it has a medical advisory panel. It doesn't have a behavioural advisory panel. Ridiculous.
But,
it's a marketing
problem. So this is probably why I should tell you that my background is in social psychology. It drives me nuts that people are reading Richard Thaler and Nudge and thinking this is about behaviour, because Nudge is so uninspiring. It doesn't recognise that interactivity, that generation, the increasing generation of people who do not want to be told what to do, but actually want to be part of that conversation. Actually, with my pensioners in Walthamstow, it's not that they don't know that they're paying higher prices, it's that the odds are stacked against them. One of the biggest challenges for us is how do we match all these things together? Because it's not just about how people combine information, it's what information people are being given. Many of you here might have heard of the My Data project, which was a project set up 3 or 4 years ago to get companies to look at how they would give people information in an accessible and portable format. What a surprise. It's not really going anywhere, because if you do that, then people can compete for business with other people. Because actually, if you make it possible for me, I am the shadow consumer minister, and I have singly failed to move my energy bill because I gave up, and I am online all the time looking at information because it's not comparable information. So there is a role for all of us to say, actually, how do we make it a fair fight? How do we make sure that people get the information in a format that they can use to make those judgments? But there's also a secondary role for recognising and respecting that people themselves, whether it is on the content of fat or sugar in food, whether it is on the impact of advertising, actually people want to be part of those conversations. They want the interactivity. They are smarter than perhaps sometimes in government, sometimes in traditional debates we give them credit for.
So I think there's a key point coming through that the New Deal must be developed in dialogue with the consumer, not forced on the consumer. We've got time for 2 or 3 more questions because we're a little bit late on the coffee break.
Got one over there.
There's one over there.
One more from the iPad. Hang on. It's a question around diversity that you've all mentioned. How can we get closer to the consumer when we're not as diverse as we should be as an industry? It was Peter's challenge to us. We've done a lot of work on that in the Ad Association this year, some sterling work from Karen Fraser. on that score. The question is from Steve Ackerman, and he says, should the advertising industry follow the example of Channel 4 and Sky by introducing binding quotas for staff recruitment from ethnic minorities so as to better reflect the community the industry is advertising to? Stella, can you take that one on quotas?
Yeah, well, so
and then Peter,
I was just on this point. So I have been working with a number of people to look at how we portray different groups within our society, and in particular, the purchasing power of women. We are 51% of the population, but when you talk to the top 100 companies in this country about how they view their advertising relationship with women, so far we've only had 28 of them come back to say that they've thought about this at all, of which 25 have no policy at all. The one that did have a policy was very, very proud that because they wanted to support a wide range of views of women, they used models of at least size 10.
Great.
51% of this audience get why that is a problem.
Yeah.
We have a long way to go to recognise the economic case for diversity in this country as a whole, but the consequences are pretty clear in terms of the consumers that are being locked out of decision-making processes and the opportunities that are being missed. And you have choices to make as an industry in the same way we have choices to make as a society. Look, I was selected as a candidate by the Labour Party on an all-women shortlist. And that is a matter of pride for me, because that was nothing to do with me and everything to do with shifting the expectations of the people making the decision to see a different category of person. Also, if you'd have met the other 26 women who I beat in that selection, you'd have realised it was not an easy ride. So when we change our expectations, when we start looking and saying, it's just not enough to see such a slow pace of progress in recognising that diversity is really good for us economically, we have choices to make as a society about how we deal with it. I was at the Channel 4 event. That was hugely depressing, frankly, but also made me even more determined that we need to start saying to people, look, if this isn't going to change anytime soon, whether it's in business, whether it's in the arts, whether it's in politics, then actually we do need to intervene more, because we simply can't afford to wait. We simply can't afford to keep asking nicely and seeing the same results.
Amen. So would you go for quotas?
Within gender, well, definitely within business, there's an argument for it, and I think people are coming round to that because what they're recognising. So, you know, when we talk about women on boards and people want to say we've made progress, what's happened over the last couple of years is a whole load of non-execs have been appointed to boards. It's not actually putting women in positions of decision-making or power. So I think that decision's coming. I think we're just at the start of the conversation around diversity itself, but the same metrics do apply. Yeah. Within the media, I think, again, you need to have the conversation, but you also need to set a time limit on if change isn't happening anytime soon, what else are we going to do? Yeah. So I wouldn't rule it out, but I think at the moment we're at the point where you need to have that conversation.
Good point. I mean, it's the pace of change in the advertising business. We are making progress, but not quickly enough. So a lot of work's being done to accelerate that. But
in my workplace of all workplaces, 4 out of 5 are men. There's a fantastic study that was done in America, I think by Susan Sarandon, of all people, that shows that if a room has 20% women in, the men think it's 50-50. And if the room has 33% women in, the men think there's more women than men in the room.
Yeah,
we are at 20% of women in leadership positions across our society. That's not just in politics, it's in business, it's in media, it's in the arts, in academia. So sometimes we don't see how far we have to go. I promise you, when we change that, if we can get to the 30% tipping point, our economy will improve and our society will improve. And actually, we need to get the message across. Diversity is really good for everyone. Everyone does better in more equal societies, and that's what I want.
Good. I hope Lindsay Clay's cheering at this point. Yeah. Peter, quick word, and then I'll take the final question from the back. I'm sorry, we've run out of time. I'll be killed.
So all I was going to say is quotas are part of an armoury of all sorts of different things we have to do. One of the things we've done at the Arts Council in the last few months is we've asked all the organisations we're giving 3-year deals to from March to sign up to something called the Creative Case for Diversity. Actually, the employment numbers in the arts is much better than the rest of the media. But leadership figures are not good enough. Yeah. We need to bring the next cadre of talent through. And then the other thing is audiences. If you sit in a typical audience and look around you, you're not pleased that the public money spent on the arts is going for everybody's benefit. So the Creative Case for Diversity is asking arts organisations who receive public money to sign up to extending their programmes in such a way that it appeals to everybody, and therefore attracting all the diverse people in their community to their performances. And they will be answerable on that, and we will be measuring them on that, and we will announce what the statistics are. So quotas are part of it. You need all sorts of different programs, but the oxygen of publicity is the greatest thing of all.
Yep.
You need to institute change and then report on how you're doing. And
Yep.
if you're not doing very well,
Yeah.
be open about it,
Listen,
because it's not easy, but we've got to do it.
Even though we've had all women shortlists to get more women into Parliament, and it's a painfully slow pace of progress, that's just the start of the conversation. I still walked into Parliament as a young blonde woman and was told, well, you better use your title Dr. Creasy, because then people will take you seriously as a young blonde woman.
Well,
so the idea that we just need to have the quota to get the women in is the start of a conversation, and the same issues around diversity too.
Yeah, and I think you, more than anyone over the last year, have seen that that is a tough fight, and there are some people out there that don't like women taking charge.
Well, I've always said if you want to judge somebody by their hair colour, you'll only do it the once.
Yeah, don't mess with Stella Creasy's end. Last question, you've got to ask it quickly, the person that had their hand up. Yeah.
From Propeller.
Hello, Martin.
Hello. But it's really a personal note as a parent of 2 children about smoking and smoking marketing. Because I think the recent ruling on plain packaging got me thinking it was a bit of a red herring, really, because looking at my children and other young people I know, they're much more influenced by editorial content, if you like, magazines, films, TV shows, what they're viewing online. I suppose it's really a question maybe to Peter from the Arts Council. If advertising's got to take its share of regulation, is there a case for editorial decision makers, program makers, producers to stop using cool models and film stars in TV programs and shows and magazine covers smoking as a proxy for being cool and one of the in crowd?
Really quick answer, please, Peter.
Well, Martin, you of course speak for the cool in crowd, so you probably know the answer better than me. But I would say this, there's a trade-off between that and artistic freedom, is there not? I went 2 nights ago to City of Angels at the Donmar Warehouse, fantastic production, set in 1940s Hollywood, with very tall, statuesque, amazing women smoking, because that's what they did in the 1940s. That was the image forced on them, but that's what they did as well, and that is the picture of the age. And if you say, well, we're going to take all the smoking out of that, you're not properly portraying what that age was. So there's a trade-off. Certainly in contemporary fiction, there's a strong argument for being realistic but being much more responsible. When you're portraying the past, I think it's a different issue.
Yeah,
Okay.
Come on. Benson & Hedges sales went up 46% when they moved to a different type of packaging. If you don't think packaging makes a difference, you're selling your colleagues short.
You think it makes more of a difference than actually full-page
I think it's one of the
pictures,
issues.
spreads in magazines and film stars?
If you think about the impact of smoking like obesity on our society, there is a fierce urgency now about having the conversation about how we tackle them, but just simply saying something else. It's a bit like saying, because arson exists, we won't tackle burglary. We need to deal with all of these issues, but clearly packaging makes a difference to the sales, and 80% of new smokers are under 19. So it is your kids and your kids' mates who are getting influenced by this stuff.
Okay, I'm going to pull the panel to a close with huge thanks to our great panellists. It's been incredibly informative. I think we've got lots of good content to work on. Legal, decent, honest, truthful, fair, conversational, clear, diverse. Lots of things for Guy Parker to think about and for us to think about. We're going to take a coffee break now. After the break, we're going to come back with Tom Brake, Maria Miller, and Chris Bryant, chaired by Mr. Ferrari. So with thanks to our panel, let's go and have coffee. Thank you.